guys, so now we are in Lugano at Plan B conference, and Lugano is the first city which adopted Bitcoin and Tether as a legal tender. And here with you Anna Tutova, co-founder of Coinstelegram, and our guest Jimmy Son, who is a Bitcoin pioneer, educator and coder, and as well he is also of 4 books. Great to have you here, Jimmy.
Well, thanks for having me. You sure you're not gonna look like enormous compared to me, just given the camera angle? I don't know. Anyway, yeah, glad to be here. Glad to be in Lugano. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so can you tell us how did you get into crypto? How did you know about Bitcoin first?
Well, so I'm not into crypto. I'm into Bitcoin, and that's
okay,
it.
You're Bitcoin maximalist.
I am. I definitely am, and I can tell you all about that in a minute. But I got into Bitcoin back in 2011 when I read a Slashdot story. And for those unfamiliar, Slashdot is a tech website for programmers. And I saw a story that said, internet-only currency Bitcoin reaches dollar parity. And I was like, what is this? I didn't know what it was. I looked into it, and I think I was in a very good position to understand it because I had studied some economics. And of course, I was a coder. I knew about cryptography and stuff like that. So when I read it, it just sort of all made sense, especially after I found out there was a 21 million limit. So based on that, I looked into it, started, trying to figure out how to buy it. It was really annoying at the time because Mt. Gox was pretty much like the only exchange that you could use. And
did you lose money in Mt. Gox?
No, I got it out before it exploded. That summer, one of my friends told me that you should get it if you have any money on Mt. Gox, get it out right now because there's some shady things going on, and I'm still very grateful to that guy. And I did, and that was that was summer of 2013 before the winter of 2013 when everything exploded.
And when you discovered Bitcoin, what was your first impression? Why did you see the value in it besides that it's deflationary and there is limited supply?
Yeah, the main instinct that I had was if there's only 21 million and if this thing takes off in any way, shape, or form, then I better be one of the first people to get it, not one of the last. So I was like, okay, I need to know about this. And it's that sort of like desire for a scarce asset that I think takes me, and I think for most people, right? Like one of the easiest ways to get people to buy something is to say there's only a limited supply or something like that. There's something I think inborn within human beings where if it's known to be scarce, you just want to go and get some. It doesn't matter what it is. So, and I think that instinct was definitely there for me, and the more I learned about it, the more I realized it was sort of like an ideal money in many ways. So that's why.
Did you get into Bitcoin mining as well or something like that?
I did for a little bit. There was a conference in Austin in 2014, and a little company from China had some miners at the conference, and this was around the time when ASICs were starting to become more popular, but to order an ASIC from almost any company took like a 6-month lead time. But there was this company with the miners there at the conference, and it was, at the time it was a small player, but it became a much larger player later, and it was Bitmain. And I bought an S1, right? They're already at like S17 or 19 or whatever. I bought an S1, and I think I mined with it for like 2 weeks or something like that. But my wife just like refused to have it in the house because it made way too much noise, and it made the room that it was in like really hot. So I think I mined maybe like half a Bitcoin or something like that, and then I sold it, and I think I made a little bit of money on it, but I was like, it's not for me, so I stopped doing that.
So how was your first experience buying Bitcoin? Did you get in immediately in 2011, and did you keep those Bitcoins till now, or did you sell some?
All right, so here's what happened. So at the time, you had to get the Mt. Gox was pretty much the only exchange. I mean, there were several others, but you had to do sketchy things like send them a check and stuff like that. In order to get money from a US bank account to Mt. Gox, you had to use a secondary service, and it was a money transmission service called Dwolla. So you had to open an account with Dwolla and then transfer your dollars to Dwolla, and then link the Dwala account with your Mt. Gox account, and then transfer it there. And I found this out trying to figure out how the heck do I get money to Mt. Gox. And it was just like too much of a pain, so I was like, forget it, right? Like this was like within the first week of learning about Bitcoin. I was like, it's too much work. One of the biggest regrets in my life, because I could have gotten into Bitcoin at like $1. Mm-hmm. That summer, it went all the way up to $30 and crashed back down. I was like, oh man, I really should get going on this. And by then, my Dwala account was approved, and it wasn't too many steps. So eventually got money into Mt. Gox, and before, I think it was like before the end of 2012, something like that, I got in. And I thought of it always sort of as a long-term investment, as in case this thing does something, then like I better just have some. And I didn't invest very much, but it obviously did very, very well. So it very quickly takes over your portfolio.
And when did you get into full-time into Bitcoin, into crypto? And
Yeah.
what are your current activities?
Yeah, so 2013 was sort of like the next bubble, right? Like it went from like $10 to like 266 before crashing again and all that. This was early 2013. So during that run up, I just read everything I could about Bitcoin. And that summer after the crash, I was still reading a lot about it. And there was a Reddit forum, it was called Jobs for Bitcoin. And I was reading it, and at the time, instead of Twitter, it was Reddit, where you went for all the news and stuff like that. And I read about Jobs for Bitcoin. I was like, oh, it's cool. All right, let's see what jobs are available. See if I could get paid for it. And there was a post that said Python programmer. And I'm like, I'm a Python programmer. There, let's message this guy. I messaged the guy, and funny story, he was a programmer in Ukraine.
Oh,
yeah.
Interesting.
And he wanted more people to contribute to his open source project, and he was willing to pay in Bitcoin for it. And it was a Bitcoin-based project, so I was like, all right, like, just send me some work. And I'm a pretty good programmer, so he sent me the work, and I worked on it, sent it back. I was like, does this seem good to you? He's like, yeah, great. Here's some more work, and some more work. And he paid me in Bitcoin, right? Like, and here I am, like, sitting in Texas, and this guy's in Ukraine, and he's like sending me money. I was like, wow. Like, I started to really kind of get it. It's like, this is amazing. I don't have to fill out any paperwork or whatever. He just pays me straight. And I'm sure you remember, like, that winter, I think, like, there was like an invasion by Putin. So I didn't hear from him for like a whole week. It was like, yeah, Putin came, and I had no internet access for a week. But that was sort of like my first exposure into that world. And at one point I was working 40 hours a week, my day job, and 40 hours at home, just like coding for this guy in Ukraine.
Is the project still alive or not anymore?
It is. It's called Color Coins, and I learned a whole lot about like all the Bitcoin internals and stuff, because he wanted me to code something, and like, I don't know how to do this. All right, let's go look up what this is and what this is, and I coded it up for him, and he'd be like, okay, that works. Yeah, go, great. Thanks for doing this, and he'd pay me. To this day, it's probably some of the best sort of like per hour money that I made, because he paid me in Bitcoin when Bitcoin was like a few $100s. And I did that for a couple months, and I was like, I really need to get sort of a job doing this, because this is way more interesting than the current job. So I got a job like sometime a little bit later, working for a company that was actually based out of Switzerland, where we are now. And then just kept getting other Bitcoin jobs and doing other Bitcoin things, to the point where I'm doing what I'm doing now. The project that I'm working on now, to answer the other part of the question, is I'm working on a book, and it's kind of based on the talk that I gave today, how fiat ruins everything. And I've written a whole bunch of articles on Bitcoin Magazine about how fiat ruins science, fiat ruins education, fiat ruins families. So I'm going to compile it all and add a few other articles to it, and yeah, that's what I'm working on at the moment.
So can you tell us in brief, like the summary of your today's presentation, and why do fiat ruin everything?
Yeah, so fiat ruins absolutely everything because it changes the incentives and everything. In a normal market, the incentives are to serve the customer better and better, right? Like, and so products get better. So if the consumer is the ultimate sort of arbiter of what goes on, then you get better and better products. So you get faster computers and cell phones with video capability and more megapixels and things like that. But once you add fiat money to it, then it's all about sort of protecting your market position. And this has happened to a lot of industries. I made the example of like airlines, for example. It takes longer right now to go from New York to London than it did in the 70s. Why is that? Because all these regulations and so on, they want to protect these airlines, which the government's bailed out and so on. And you see this all over the world. So there isn't that much innovation in the airline industry, and honestly, Europe has more innovation than the U.S. At least you have like the discount airlines that let you like fly from city to city for €29 or something like that. But like technical innovation, right? Like new types of planes, stuff like that. That hasn't happened at all because fiat money is subsidizing the current players, and they have no incentive to innovate because the government subsidizes through fiat money their current position, and competitors can't get on board or whatever. And that's essentially what's happened all over society. And it's not just airlines, it's education, it's healthcare, it's all kinds of things. And we're seeing stagnation across the board, even regression in many ways. And this is how civilizations decline. This is what happened with the Romans. It's what happened with any declining empire, where you sort of reach a peak at which point, like, you're the reserve currency of the world, and you no longer care about manufacturing and stuff. There's a reason why the U.S. doesn't manufacture anything. Everything's sort of like moved towards China. It's because the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, and labor is cheaper elsewhere, so all the manufacturing goes elsewhere. That's where we are. It ruins everything. And my sort of conclusion was that we've been declining since like 1969, when man landed on the moon. That was the last sort of like quantum leap that we made in sort of like technological innovation. We haven't done anything since then, and it's not a coincidence because 1971 we cut ties to gold. And as a result, we've been stagnating and regressing since then. And we finally have hope again because we have Bitcoin. That's basically it. So.
Yeah, so how, in your opinion, Bitcoin may change the situation in this case?
Yeah, so Bitcoin changes the equation a lot because within Bitcoin, there's no subsidization, there's no fiat money, there's no like sort of political wrangling to protect your position in the market. And that means that you get better products and you have more innovation, and you have to serve the customer instead of the government, instead of the money printer, and that changes everything. I pointed out that the last 50 years, the best and the brightest people, they go towards investment banking, which is like the ultimate in rent seeking, right? Like you don't add value to anybody, but you make hundreds of millions of dollars. Heads I win, tails you lose, right? You get bailed out by taxpayers if you don't, do whatever you lose in your bet or whatever. So, you take all of these people that are super talented and you put them in like the biggest leeching positions. Of course, like society's gonna crumble. But you take that away with something like Bitcoin. You take that ability away. Now you have to be productive, right? And this is the real market process sort of coming into play with Bitcoin. And that's the hope. I think there's still some degeneration fiat-wise to go before we reach that point, but we at least have a trajectory back up because we have Bitcoin.
But still we calculate all the prices and we compare the price of Bitcoin to US dollar, and so all of like nobody calculates the prices for commodities or services in Bitcoin. Like maybe when you started your first venture in crypto, when you worked with that guy from Ukraine, your salary was calculated in Satoshis or something like that, or in Bitcoins. but now like, it will be hard to calculate anything in Bitcoin.
Yeah, it is because the dollar hegemony still exists, and but I mean we're kind of seeing the rapid deterioration of the financial markets, and the U.S. is in big trouble, right? Like because you know you're looking at the 10-year treasuries and stuff like that. The rates are all rising. The U.S. government can't afford that given the budget unless they do a lot more printing, and so it's sort of like a self-defeating cycle. You can try to control inflation by raising the rates, but then the government doesn't have enough to spend, so then they're going to have to print more money at some point. So it can't last without some form of significant inflation happening somewhere. And if that happens, then people are going to store in Bitcoin, and slowly gradually, then suddenly, Bitcoin becomes the standard, right? Like it is for people like me. I am on a Bitcoin standard, and I measure my wealth in Bitcoin. And as more people get to that, there's a certain sort of like, you know, inflection point where more people denominate in Bitcoin, and then you have the people sort of measuring everything in Bitcoin instead of US dollars. That's not the case for most people, but it will happen at some point.
And how do you generally see the macroeconomic situation?
Yeah, they've been, every time there's sort of like an economic crisis, central banks sort of like do something, right? What's crazy is that they've had to do more and more. So 1987, there was Black Friday on Wall Street, and I think the Dow Jones like fell from 1,500 to like 1,000. So it was like a significant downswing of like 33%, something like that. And the Fed rate, I think at that time was like 5.25%, and they lowered it by 0.25%. That was enough to make everything recover. 1992, there was a recession, and the Fed started to cut rates. But a quarter point wasn't going to do it, so they had to go lower it all the way down to like 3%. And that was enough to do. 2001, September 11th happens. They need to stimulate the economy again. A cut from 3% to 2% doesn't do it. To 1% doesn't do it. Like they have to like go pretty close to zero. Okay, 2008 happens. Next financial crisis. You're pretty much at zero. What do you do? Well, you have to do quantitative easing. You have to actually buy assets on the market. You can't have a negative Fed funds rate. So I mean, they make loans basically free, and they have to do all this other stuff. Now, what do we have to do in 2020 with all the coronavirus stuff? Rates are already at zero. You have to do massive stimulus. You have the PPP program, all this other stuff. So it's kind of like this. The weapon that you have to use financially has to get bigger and bigger and bigger, right? At the beginning, you can use a bow and arrow. Next, you have to use a gun. Next, you have to use like a bomb. And then next, you have to use like a nuclear bomb, right? Like you have to keep making it like a bigger and bigger impact. And we're at a point where even a nuclear bomb's not doing it financially. So this is sort of, we're I think fairly close to that edge where they have to pick their poison. But either way, you're going to get big inflation because governments want to spend. They can't cut back that much. And even if they try, their populations won't let them. So you're in kind of a weird situation macroeconomically, and I never would have guessed that this would be the way that, like a pandemic would be the thing that would. I always thought it would be like some sort of global war or something like that would crush it. But this may well be the end. I don't know. Maybe they stay for another cycle, and we have a crisis in 2028 or something like that, and then bam, like the U.S. dollar collapses or something. But the systemic, like you can only keep the Ponzi going for so long. You can't like each time you need a bigger and bigger weapon. They've kind of run out of weapons financially. So that's where we are.